Welcome to Feeling Asian, a podcast where two Asians talk about their feelings. I'm Youngmi Mayer.
And I'm Brian Park, and we have an amazing episode this week, Youngmi.
I'm very excited about it. It's gonna be a popular one, is my guess.
Oh yeah, and this episode's a little spicy because it's after hours right now. This is Feeling Asian after hours.
We have never recorded this late. I've never been in Brian's apartment this late. And then I came in and I was like, my stomach kind of hurts. And Brian's like, you're going to give me COVID again. And I might be spiraling a little because I feel like my stomach hurts a little. And I'm like, if this is COVID.
Okay, listeners, I asked Youngmi how she was feeling right before I clicked the record button. And she said, I'm feeling great. So this is all news to me, too. But, before we, jump into this episode, let's do our Patreon shout-outs really quickly, Youngmi.
Okay.
Yeah, listeners, so if you like the podcast, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/feelingasian. We offer different subscription tiers, but any donation amount gets you a shout-out on the podcast where Youngmi and I give you a positive affirmation.
Yes.
Yes. Well, without further ado, our first shout-out for this episode goes out to Eunice Huangbo.
Eunice knows how to ski.
You heard her. You know how to ski, Eunice. Thank you for the donation. Our second shout out goes out to Mia Kim. Mia, you weren't the best in gymnastics, but you were still amazing.
I swear to God, Brian has started to do this where his affirmations are like, you're not good at something, but it's okay. I don't think that's an off affirmation, but
I'm trying to
spice it up.
I'm trying to affirm their content of character, not the results.
Yeah, you're not about like pure talent. You're saying that they try hard and achieve something, right? That's good.
And ultimately,
good,
yeah, it's
you
not
weren't
about
born with
it. It's about the friends you made along the way.
Okay.
Our next shout out goes out to Thomas Murray.
I'm gonna do like a Brian. You don't have any friends, but everyone really likes you. It's because they're too intimidated by you. It's because you're too cool for everybody. That's me being Brian.
Cindy Lamb, you're so hot.
Yeah.
That's it.
What else? There's nothing else that's important in this world. Right?
Our next shout out goes out to Brandon.
Brandon can eat really spicy hot pot, and he knows what to order at hot pot. I don't even know if that's an affirmation, but everyone wants to go eat hot pot with Brandon.
Timelu, you're a doctor and your parents are very proud of you.
That's the most Asian affirmation that you can ever get. It's just...
Next shout out goes out to Jana.
Jana's a rebel, Dottie.
I like that one. You're a rebel, Dottie.
That's a Pee Wee Herman reference.
Next shout out goes out... Oh...
I'm old.
Yeah, that's not Gen Z material right there.
We lost some followers on that. Lost some listeners on that one.
Imagine going up to someone who's Gen Z and asking if they know Pee Wee Herman.
So funny.
Next shout out goes out to Mona Wang. Mona, you are so intelligent and all of your cousins are so jealous of you.
Specifically cousins. Not your siblings.
Oh, a special one for our next shout out. Jennifer Jensen.
Jennifer Jensen.
We know her.
Jennifer Jensen this is what I'm going to say. Jennifer Jensen, everything that she's ever wanted, she's gone out and gotten it. Opposite of imposter syndrome. I don't understand what imposter syndrome is.
And you bring great energy into the Feeling Asian Zoom happy hours.
Vibes are immaculate.
Last shout out goes out to Max Chung.
Max is just a hot name. You know Max is hot. Come on.
Max, you go out with your boys and without fail, you're the one who makes sure that all your boys are having a good time because all the girls want to hang out with you.
Alpha male. Is that? No, that's toxic.
Big alpha male energy.
I think
it's
that's toxic.
And I mean it. You're big alpha male energy.
We mean big alpha male energy in the most toxic way possible. All right. Since we ruined everyone's lives, let's introduce our guest.
Okay. So, before we do, listeners, this episode is going to be a little bit different. We in the past we did this big Asian therapist roundup episode.
Yeah.
Where we sort of dove into some of the insights of what it's like being an Asian therapist and what are some of the challenges that come with that.
Yeah.
And listeners, like, the feedback was amazing, so thank you so much for tuning into that episode.
Yeah, and also because it is so hard to find Asian therapists. I think our guest said last time, please correct me when you come on, but the statistic is very low. It's like something like 11% are Asian in the field.
11% is very specific. Let's hope that
I hope that
right.
that's right. But yeah, so we fielded this question to our listeners. Since so many of you are Asian and don't have an Asian therapist, what would you ask an Asian therapist if you had one?
And we received so many submissions from our listeners, and that's why we have brought on some of the listener favorites from the Therapist Roundup episode. Listeners, please give a warm welcome to Doctors Peter Adams and Melissa Yao of Buckeye Psychology.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
We're back for the after hours.
After
version.
hours, we're getting
Yes.
sensual. Sorry, I don't know.
Feeling Asian at night.
Got
At night.
this is either water or,
Wow.
or vodka.
I'm a little
One or the
disappointed that you're
other.
not drinking cocktails.
We thought about it.
I saw you drinking boba.
We were drinking boba,
Wow.
but then we thought it might not be so good to be chewing on something while we were recording this podcast.
Yeah. Do they do
ASMR
alcoholic
vibes.
boba?
Huh?
Is that a thing? Do they do alcoholic boba?
I
too?
did-
Oh, absolutely.
I've had an alcoholic boba cocktail once. It was amazing. But 3,000
Good.
calories a drink. It was worth it. Wait,
It's
but
just like
wait,
Kahlua. It's like half
yeah,
Kahlua.
add some
with
add
some
milk, whole
ice.
heavy cream in there. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Wait, so we wanted you to have you on, and we wanted to format it this way because Brian and I do this podcast and we talk about our feelings a lot, and we always
Yeah.
say on the podcast like we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we thought it'd be funny if we got questions from our listeners and then we answered them as dumbasses, and
I
then
like to use the term armchair psychologist, but we can go with dumbasses
armchair
too.
dumbasses, and then we got your professional sort of answers. Does that sound good to you?
AKA exercise that PhD. You are both doctors. Professional sort of answers.
Apply some pressure on us.
Yeah.
Flex in front of us.
This sounds like a perfect.
This is gonna be
perfect
you
plan.
humiliating us this entire episode. Does that sound fun
It's
to
just-
anybody?
This
It's-
is
And then we'll process how that feels for you and what comes up when we totally destroy your answers.
Okay.
yes,
Right.
I am down. I am down.
What if we enjoy it?
That's true.
Freaks.
It's a very holistic. We're gonna get a lot of holistic information from different
I'm-
sources today.
But before we dive into these wonderful submissions, we wanted to ask you, how are you feeling? We're going to step outside. We're not going to answer how are we feeling this episode, because for the sake of time, we want to get to all these wonderful submissions. So if you want to know how Young Me and I are doing, you got to check us out on Patreon behind that paywall.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Melissa and Peter, how are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
you want the the real shit.
Give us the real shit.
Right.
Always.
Always the real shit.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling excited about being on the podcast again. I'm feeling a little bit nervous. I think when we were, talking about this and thinking about coming on, definitely my imposter syndrome was kicking in of like, oh, like I'm not qualified to answer questions or be interviewed. But then, Tona and I were, talking about just some of our experiences, and then I felt like, yeah, we can do this. So I'm excited.
Well, you shouldn't feel like that because Brian and I are way far less qualified.
And we've been doing this for over 100 episodes.
Every week we're like, here we are again. How about you, Peter? How are you feeling?
I'm glad you're feeling excited. I'm also excited. I'm a little raw today, if I'm being honest.
Ooh.
We have a wonderful 14-month-old named Simone Soun, and she's a terrible sleeper.
Oh.
And Wednesday and Thursday are my days to get up with her. And those happen to also be work days where I see a bunch of people. And she got me up at 4:40 on Wednesday. And then
Rude.
4:45 on Thursday.
Oh.
And on my sleep-in day today, she was making a bunch of noise during that time. And so I was not sleeping well either. So it's kind of coming in today, kind of not the most rested. And having read these...
So Peter feels like shit.
I feel like shit. Which is why I didn't do the cocktail, or it would have been the Sleepy Time podcast.
Yeah.
And the Sleepy Time podcast isn't what we were going for. But also reading these questions, a combination of reading these questions and being quite tired, had me feeling a little bit emotional at points.
Oh, wow.
Just to know that you had such an exuberant response, and that so many people would take your invitation to kind of put a question out there, and just none of these people know each other, I don't think, on some of the questions you pulled, and yet there's all these threads that connect and commonalities, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of reference to, and as people will see as we get into it, a lot of reference to trauma and family and identity, and
these are definitely issues that we see among our clients.
Right.
We have lots of folks. I was telling Tone, I think last night when we were talking about this, like right now, 60% of my caseload is Asian or Asian American.
Oh, wow.
Which for this area is really significant. And so the questions that you pulled really reflect like a lot of the issues that I'm seeing like in therapy.
Right. I mean, I have to say that we get such a big response from even the last episode that you did. It had a huge like response, and for me doing this, it makes me feel like it does make me feel like we're like sort of like soothing a need, like filling a need, you know what I mean? And it just like it's so unfortunate that I think so many Asian people would just go to therapy if they knew that there were more Asian therapists, but unfortunately at this moment it's was that statistic correct, the 11%? Did you say that last time?
It's right around that for therapists.
Right.
Like there are a little bit more psychologists. That might have been the statistic for but then psychologists who practice therapy, it's an even lower number.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. So
Right.
there's definitely like a huge need, and I'm like so obviously thankful that you've come back to the podcast, because people really enjoy listening to both of you. So
Well, that's nice. And yeah, and again, like that connection you brought in about people listen, this is meaningful. I think that's kind of where some of my rawness comes in today, is seeing these questions, knowing that of course, we want to instill like some lightness and joy and humor into this time together, and yet at the same time, the people are being very kind of personal and raw
Very
and
vulnerable.
and like questions they shared, and the fact that people will listen and we may contribute to supporting people or getting them to consider therapy. Someone may reach out to us and talk about how they get connected with someone or referrals. And so there's just something, I don't know, it feels a little emotional. We do this work every day on a one-on-one level, but this is kind of a different format, and it feels powerful in a different way.
Yeah.
So
like the scale of it, right? Yeah, I feel like that's like very moving.
Right. And well, for our listeners out there, first and foremost, we want to say thank you for putting yourself out there, being so vulnerable, and sharing your stories. And unfortunately, we just received too many submissions. So if we didn't get to yours, rest assured, this is a series that we would like to continue. So,
also, I just want to point out that we chose the questions that we were seeing a lot of, like, so we have
bucketed them into categories.
Yeah.
And a lot of these questions, we saw a common theme and thread through a lot of these. But
quick, if I may, real quick, just a quick kind of, I don't know if a disclaimer is quite the right word, but I think it is probably important to make sure people are aware that as we kind of have this conversation today that this isn't actually therapy.
Yes.
Yes.
And whether we're talking about the armchair psychologist version or the actual
Yeah.
psychologist version, it's not actually therapy. And we're kind of more responding from a place of like maybe kind of how we're reacting kind of to the questions
Yeah.
and
Right.
just kind of some of our maybe general thoughts about what they're referencing. And so, you
Right.
know, that's a little bit different than
No, absolutely.
I'm really glad you
So,
said that.
I
So
think
this,
it's
yeah,
really important to stress that.
And
that
if you're-
this is
yeah.
not
this
a
isn't what therapy
substitute
is
for
like.
therapy. This isn't a therapy. Also, young man, I think we should also give a disclaimer that our
Don't do
dumbass
anything.
armchair psychology is not therapy.
Don't listen. Just like block out the parts where we
Just
talk.
click
Just
on
skip
the
to Melissa and
skip
Peter.
10 seconds until Peter and Melissa speak.
All right, let's start with the questions.
Yeah, so the first general bucket or category we received was we're going to start broad, therapy in general. And a listener submitted, when do you know you need therapy? What if I don't think I need it, but I want it?
So I guess we should answer that first.
Yes, young me,
Just
you
so-
can be my guest. Go right ahead.
Really? Okay. So this was my journey. This is how I knew that I needed therapy. I would talk about like the same thing over and over and over again with my friends, and some like things that would make me really angry or sad, especially angry and sad. And I would just like offload over and over and like obsessively like ask my friends about the same shit every day. And then I think one of my close friends was like, have you thought of like going to therapy? And I didn't understand why she said it. But then after going to therapy, I realized it's because like that's the kind of shit that I would tell my therapist.
Right.
And then my therapist would help me resolve that so that I could resolve my emotions around that. And I wouldn't have to like go say the same story over and over to my friends who are just being my friends and listening to my story. But obviously they couldn't help me like recover from it. Do you know what I mean? Like a therapist could. So that's like why I personally started there. And I didn't even know I needed it. I didn't even know that that's what it was that's the itch it was gonna scratch, to be honest.
Right.
But when I started, I was like, oh, this is what therapy is. How about you, Brian? How did you?
Okay, so I feel that if you're someone who's asking yourself this already, that is an indication that you're interested in seeing a therapist. And I believe that, again, there's a lot of factors that might prevent you from doing it. There's cultural considerations, there's socioeconomic considerations, but
Yeah.
if you have the means, I think it is an incredibly healthy resource to pursue, because there is after having gone to therapy myself, I find that there is an inherent value in seeing a third-party professional who can you can have that space for catharsis and have like a third opinion on things.
Right.
And similar to you, I just felt like there was like a cycle of behavior that I found myself engaging with.
Yeah.
But you know, I didn't want to admit that I needed to see a therapist because of like cultural stigma.
Right.
But it wasn't until I started questioning it, like maybe I do. What is therapy? Maybe I do want to see it. I think that's already a sign. Like there shouldn't be so much friction. I feel like things are self-evident. So if you're someone who's like ever thought about it before, I think that's a sign that maybe you already know yourself that it's something you want to pursue.
Yeah, and also you can go and maybe you don't think it's right for you. We did get a message from somebody saying that it was too difficult, like it was too painful, and then she had to stop, which is totally valid.
Right. Okay, so how'd we do?
No, just give.
I was gonna.
You're wrong.
You know, there's that inherent self-effacement that can come with Asian American people, and so I was having a reaction earlier about don't listen to us at all. Like, in fact, more Asians talking to other Asians or sharing with other Asians their perspectives on mental health is such an untapped resource. I mean, even a lot of the Asian Americans we see, it's not wide open for them, right? It's like pretty private. It's pretty contained, and so that's not to say you all aren't going to have all the answers, but there's a lot people can get from your own experiences in therapy and thinking, investing in your own emotional health. Sorry to throw that in there.
Are we gonna?
Well, do you want to answer the question?
You can if you want.
Well, I can respond. Well, I don't know. I think that, like Brian was saying, if you're asking yourself this question, like maybe it's time. Like maybe there's something in you. There's
heard that,
some like discontent you're experiencing, or like Youngmi was saying, like some pattern that you're noticing that you want to explore further. And I think there's this misconception sometimes that you only go to therapy if you're like in crisis or if you're experiencing like significant, like severe mental health issues. And that's really not the reality. Sometimes people come to therapy when they're functioning, maybe they're doing well in their job, they have a relationship, but just something feels a little bit off. They're not getting, maybe like the sense of like enjoyment from their life that they are hoping for, or maybe there is something from their past that they're wanting to explore and look at how that's connected to their current behavior. And again, there might not be this like dysfunction, but they're wanting to like kind of like optimize their lives. And so that is definitely something that therapy can offer as well. And I think it's important, like, for you to talk about your experiences in therapy, and even for us to talk about what therapy can look like, because it can be different things. It can be offering perspectives, it can be offering feedback, it can be like processing the relationship, or processing the past, just depending on what folks need and what they're looking for.
Right. That's a good point. Also, I feel like I didn't even know some of the feelings that I had in my life. I even had those feelings until I went to therapy, and then I resolved some of them. I was like, oh, I thought I was going to feel like shit and depressed my entire life. I didn't know that I could like get out of that.
Yeah.
You don't know until you like sort of recover from that.
Right.
Yeah, you can both reveal feelings or insights you weren't aware of, but there's also the piece too that I'd add where you may be having certain reactions to things, and you may have no clue where that's coming from. Like, but it's something you've noticed. Like, how come I always go into the tank emotionally when in this sort of situation, or why do I always react in this way? I genuinely do not know what's going on there. Or like, I don't have any sense of connection to why that's happening, and so. That's another thing. And patterns, that's something that I heard from y'all, was just this idea of being curious about certain patterns you may observe in yourself.
Yeah.
You gave examples of that. The only other one I'd add would be sometimes those are interpersonal patterns where you're getting various forms of feedback from people in your life that they seem to react to you a certain way, or they're experiencing you in this kind of way, kind of a lot. So sometimes people come in and they'll say, I've been getting X and Y feedback a lot from different people in my life, and it seems like something I need to look at or examine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a good one.
I feel like that would resonate with a lot of Asian people, because I feel like this might be a broad generalization, but you're kind of taught to sort of like read everyone else's like response to you. You know what I mean? Instead of like knowing what you want personally.
That's something that I got a lot, and what compelled me to explore it. Like, people would tell me that I like would overthink or worry too much, and it wasn't congruent to the magnitude was too much for like whatever the event or the thing that I was worrying about, and it's just general anxiety. So that it was a lot of different feedback from different types of people, and so it's like a physical, when we go to the doctor when you have like a physical ailment that kind of nags at you, so why not see a therapist if this is like like a mental health related like ailment where maybe there's nothing there, but maybe there is, and I won't know until I see a professional about it.
Yeah, got it.
And we don't always realize we don't have a reference point a lot of the time, because a lot of what we experience,
because that's not how you feel.
Right. And so like, Brian, you may not have known like that it was a disproportionate sort of emotional response you were having.
Right.
Without some of that outside observation, people who are caring about you and kind of referencing that. For you, that's just my reaction. Like,
Yeah.
and that's your baseline. And so,
That's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That was my
Totally.
relationship to body dysmorphia. I just thought everyone felt like shit about their bodies
Yeah,
and thought
great
that they looked
example.
disgusting all the time. And
Yeah.
then I realized that that's not normal.
Some people take a selfie and they're like, I look good.
Wow, look at this
Thanks.
amazing every picture I take of me is so hot.
I like the way I look. No qualms here.
And then I discovered that that's
Yeah.
not how everyone feels. And then I was like, oh, that was huge for me. Wait, okay,
Yeah.
so should we
Well,
move on
I
to the
wanna
next
say
topic?
too,
Yeah,
well,
so-
before we move on, I just want to say too, like sometimes
yeah.
folks like come to therapy and they're almost like apologetic for being in therapy, like they don't deserve it, or their problems aren't serious enough, or other people have it so much worse, and so it's really hard for them to like give themselves permission to like be in that space, and
Yeah.
so like that's something that we'll talk about sometimes, like where that's coming from, and like to really validate, like I get what you're saying, that yes, like maybe you have some advantages or you have some privilege, but you're also like suffering in these ways, or you're experiencing these issues or these negative impacts, and that's valid.
Yes.
Like it doesn't, you're not living anybody else's life. Like you're living your life, and these are the things that you're not satisfied. So like, let's take this time to really explore that.
It's the
That is so
yeah.
true.
'Cause it's
With
like
Asian-
feels like you're selfish or something. I think people think it's
Yeah.
selfish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a very good
With
point.
a lot of Asian American clients in particular.
Yeah.
Asian
Because the
yeah.
reference point is often their parents.
Well, we hear that from our guests, our Asian American guests.
Mm.
All of them are Asian, obviously, and they'll be like, "Oh, I feel bad, but then I don't have it as bad as everyone else, so I feel bad for feeling bad," like things like that. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I think we hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, we want to jump into our next topic. And
Huge topic.
listeners, as you might have guessed, we've got a lot of submissions related to Asian parents. Now,
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise. Now, the first submission we want to highlight, it centers around boundaries.
Mm.
And this person wrote, how do you set boundaries with your typical Asian parents who are set in their ways with no intention of changing? I set boundaries with my dad 2 months ago because he kept bailing on my son, and it was very triggering for me. No response from him, and we haven't talked since. I did it in a way that I thought was respectful but assertive, but I'm wondering if a different approach would have worked better. It's ridiculous how anytime I'd voice my opinion growing up, he'd shut me down, so I'm beyond over the relationship, especially now that I have a kid.
Mm.
But I guess I'm still curious.
Have you done that with your parents before, Brian? I've done it with my mom before.
Setting boundaries?
Yeah. Brian's like,
Okay,
No.
this is let me put on my armchair. Okay, so this is my 2 cents. No,
Okay.
I don't. I'm bad at setting boundaries with my own parents. This is where I'm at now, and this is this is how I'm gonna answer this. Sometimes it just do be like that. No, let me clarify. Sometimes it be like that, and I think it's especially with our parents, they're older than us. It's incredibly hard to change people. I've accepted that my parents have lived their life up until this point. They've experienced their hardships. They've endured their traumas. They're set in stone. And as much as I tell them and show them articles and, armchair psychology them, they are stubborn. They're set in their ways. I can't expect them to change. Now, what I can change is how, creating mechanisms for myself.
how much weed you smoke? I'm
like-
just kidding.
is to protect myself.
Right,
So
right,
what
right,
I
right.
do
Yeah.
is just accept, you know what? It do be like that sometimes. I try to understand why my parents are immutable to change, why they react in this way.
Yeah.
And I constantly remind myself that, and that's how I keep it in check. Of course, I get super frustrated. My parents are not good with boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
but I just have to realize that I don't know. That's hard. I feel like that's just how my parents are. I'm not going to change them, and I can remind myself. Yeah, I just have to remind myself what they've been through, but then how to mitigate the amount of quote unquote damage or like
Yeah.
how challenging it is for me.
I think I want to ask you more about this because the next
Okay.
question deals with that too,
Sure.
and I'm going to ask you more in depth about how, I made the weed joke, but like how what that means for you actually,
Right.
because that's a big issue for me. The boundaries thing specifically, though, I think I talked about this, maybe I don't know when, but I set a boundary with my mom about, because of my body dysmorphia. I was like, just don't talk about my body.
Yeah.
And then she was like okay, and she was really good, and she kept the boundary.
Yeah.
And then but instead she kept saying, instead of calling me fat, because she always calls me fat, she would, every time I would FaceTime her, she would say, "You look so skinny today. You look skinny.
Yeah,
Someone's looking skinny."
overcompensate.
And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, that's such BS. And then one
Right.
day I snapped, and I was like, don't talk about my body. And then she got really angry at me, and she was like, "Well, I thought you wanted me to call you skinny, and I can't ever say anything right, blah, blah, blah." But then she stopped talking about my body for a few months. She's back on it now.
Right.
But
Right.
so I don't have any advice. I don't know how to set a boundary.
To go back to the first question, this is where I found having a therapist was helpful for me. It's
Yeah.
about like putting up these resources for myself to minimize like damage, like to use a video game reference, like minimize the hit points I'm incurring. It's like anytime I hang out with my parents, there's stressors, there's things that trigger me or it gets upset. But now, I have certain friends I can reach out to and like vent to. I have a therapist I can release these like things that are boiling over in me, because I know that my parents, like those aren't the people I can like,
there's gonna be no
release those
resolution.
emotions to.
Yeah.
But it's an easier pill for me to swallow now if I just remind myself, well, they have their own baggage that they're dealing with. Of course they're imperfect, like they've lived a difficult life, and I try to focus on the positives, so like that they've provided for me, and that's it. Okay.
What's your opinion about boundaries? How do you set healthy boundaries?
I had a kind of a general reflection on this first, maybe. Having spent some time reflecting on this, I actually think this might be sort of one of the underrated, most important skills for Asian American children to develop. And why I say that is because, and I think we talked about this on the last pod a little bit, this idea that like, kind of the kind of more individualistic, kind of Germanic kind of focus on like, just individualism, and this sort of therapist telling you like, well, just kind of cut these people off, or like remove yourself from the situation and kind of act as the individual and in the individual's best interests, right? Like there's kind of this tendency. Well, a lot of Asian children, they don't want to leave their parents, or like they don't want to leave their families. And that makes being able to sort of explore and establish boundaries even more important. Does that make sense?
Yes. Because that's the only, if you're not going to cut them off and be a complete individual and and embrace that, then the only other alternative is setting really healthy boundaries
and make life livable with them. Right? Yeah, I think I just read something once where it said something like, people don't realize that when you're setting a boundary with them, you're trying to keep them in your life.
Right. But
right.
That's a great, that's a nice little, that's relevant to that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But what do you do in the instance if your parents are incredibly stubborn and are not intent on changing?
I think one thing when thinking about, putting myself in the position of the therapist here, that it's really important to have an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. So, what is it exactly that, like, are you trying to accomplish one thing in particular? Is there one area of your life in particular? Is there something personal, like you talked about, Young Me, where like there are certain triggers, and so it comes from that place? You know, are there a handful of different things that you're trying to accomplish, and each of those may kind of look a little different in terms of like what the boundary looks like. And so really, either through your own processes or in therapy or kind of with someone maybe who has some experience with this, kind of just really getting a good sense of that for yourself. Sometimes people know it's not working or know that they're suffering quite a bit, but they haven't quite figured out kind of what it is that they're trying to change or shift, or and so that part's really important.
Yeah, I think it took me a long time for me to even realize that that's what I wanted. I was like, every time I interact with my parents, it hurts me. And then I didn't even have the language. Like, I didn't even understand that word bound. I didn't even know what that meant, you know, until I went to therapy.
Right. And for someone like me, where my only purpose is to prove to my parents that I am right and you're wrong, I'm still suffering. Sorry.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Melissa?
Well, yeah, I think that, like you were saying, you know, boundaries are so important in order to maintain a relationship, like maintain a relationship where you feel, I don't know, feel some sense of connection, but also maybe there are parts of yourself that you want to protect from the other person, or just kind of, you know, maybe, yeah, like protect. And you know, it makes me think like there's so many different kinds of boundaries. Like some of it may be like external, like interpersonal, like you were talking about, Young Me, like having a conversation, like letting somebody know, like, okay, this is like off limits. Like this makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to have this conversation. Like this is something that I'm not going to discuss. And, you know, some of it can be internal, like this sense of like, well, let me temper my expectations and what I'm going to share with this person, like knowing like what I may not be able, you know, to get from them. Like maybe I just kind of have to accept like my parents are not going to give me like the support or understanding or you know, validation. And so like how do I engage with them in a way that still feels like positive or feels like tolerable, and so that may mean like, yeah, just, you know, kind of monitoring yourself and being like, just knowing what you can, you know, how much you can open up to those people.
You know, I just want to mention that what Melissa just said is really heartbreaking, I think, for me personally. Like, it's very painful, and it kind of reminds me of like the next thing that we were going to read, a listener question.
Yeah.
It was how to reconcile appreciation and respect for your parents' filial piety while also acknowledging the lifelong trauma they caused and being able to move on from that without cutting them off. And so it's like what Melissa was saying, it's like you have to sort of like, okay, if you're not going to cut your parents off, what you have to do is mute some of that anger, right? I mean, maybe I'm like saying this wrong, but like mute some of those emotions so you can just accept that they're not going to apologize, and just like you want them in your life, so just get over it and live continually with them.
Right.
And for me personally, that has made me, it's been heartbreaking because I had like a nightmare, I think after like a therapy session once, where I saw my mom like in the ocean on a boat, and like I could see her but I couldn't get her, like she was about to float away. And like I think that was like my brain telling me why I was sad. It's like, you're right there, like, you know, what I want from you, I feel like is right there, but it's never gonna happen. I'm never gonna get it. And it's like, I don't know, that's like so heartbreaking for me.
Oh,
it is.
And that's why I want to ask you when
like
you mentioned that before, Brian, like, how do you deal with that sadness, I think, or anger?
Well, that's encapsulates entirely what I meant from my first response to this. Is what I mean by like, you know, to oversimplify, like, it do be like that. Like, it's just, that's just what it is. And
it do be like,
I'm in a, yes, I've cried, I've shed a lot of tears, like just wishing my parents would change, or why couldn't I get this thing from them. But I'm in a place now where, to your point, Melissa, like my process has been more internal, where I can say like, yes, it do be like that, but I have friends and other resources that I can get that thing that I want from them from these other resources, and I'm at peace with that. I can reconcile with that. It's okay. Like I can just it hurts, but I can accept that. My parents might, and looking more deeply, maybe my parents can't provide the thing that I want from them because they can't even see that within themselves. Like they didn't have access to these sorts of mental health resources that are available to us today. That so I don't have any resentment towards them. That's how I used to resent them, but that's dissipated when I with the empathy, trying to express more compassion towards them.
Yeah. Do you have any professional? Oh yeah, Peter, did you want to say something? I wanted to just ask what your thought is.
I'm glad you segued into this one because these do overlap, and this is a bit anecdotal from my professional experience, but I think something I like to do when clients come in and they're very clear, like viewers or listeners or viewers can't see how this was written, but the question is all in caps at the end, and then it says without cutting them off, which kind of illustrates my point from earlier about why I think this is one of the most underrated skills for Asian American children to develop is boundaries. This is the subtext of that, without cutting them off. It means people always tell me to just cut them off.
Right.
You guys don't tell me to just cut them off. That's why I'm putting this in caps, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking for a different alternative. But one of the things I like to do with clients who are coming in with that mentality is I do like to try to get them to kind of go back on that a little bit, and not to say that they would never cut them off, essentially, but to understand instead what their limits are. So when we operate from this place of this is never an option, I will never cut them off, this can never happen, I could never do it, etc., and so on, there's a restricting sort of nature to that. I think it's a useful exercise, even if there's some difficulty in sitting with the idea initially that we all have limits, and what are yours? They may be exponentially more they may be greatly different from one of your friends or your white buddy, and you guys talk about this stuff, but they are there. So an example, maybe someone may really try to sit with that, and they may say, well, if my father ever laid hands on my daughter,
right,
if I saw some of the things we experienced, my siblings and I, if I saw that or became aware of that, then yes,
yes,
right.
And again, they may seem unrelated, but I don't know, just from clinical experience, I feel like moving from there is a line and it is an option, and I can articulate what that is, I think creates a sort of a little more of a freedom.
Yeah.
You're operating less from a place of this is the only option and this can never happen, and the restriction of that, to I know where my line is and I can work within that.
Whoa.
That's so great. Damn.
I know. Meanwhile, I'm just over spouting off it do be like that. It is what it is.
That was very different advice than it do be like that. That's for sure. And me talking about a dream that I had, that was very different. That's such good advice. And I just want to say I really liked how you said I feel like that was really important when you said you do have a limit. You might not know where it is, but you do have a limit, and maybe just thinking about what that is
broke my brain, because it is more liberating once you test that limit, and now you know you have an actual stronger sense of what is that boundary that you're playing with, and I can just feel like once I know what that is, it just illuminates how I'm going to react to so many other things going forward.
Yeah.
it just frees you of some of that. There's it's subtle. There's a subtle liberation
Yeah.
to that as you then get into really starting to explore kind of these boundaries and such. And I do think as well that sort of from a Western frame, and this may come in with other questions, but I do think from a Western frame, the idea of sort of sticking with an abuser or sticking with someone who has wounded or harmed you in this way, either historically or presently, is there's a negative that's the sort of, it's viewed negatively.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And there's a negative connotation to that. Sometimes there's a judgment to that. And I think we can all get in that Western frame of mind and understand where that comes from. I think all four of us do. And yet at the same time, what I think it's important to acknowledge sometimes for Asian clients who are trying to navigate this is it takes a lot of commitment and resilience to stay in a relationship that hurts you.
Yes.
And sorry, go ahead, Youngmi.
I was just gonna say, I think in Asian cultures, that's respected. You know, the suffering, like you're in this like painful suffering situation, and that's like revered, and that's like a trait that people really look up to and respect. I don't know if that's obviously, you know.
Yeah.
Versus
so my
like what you were
concern
saying in
here-
the West, it's like thought of negatively.
Right, my concern here is people are gonna have a reaction to me saying that. Like there's some concern in that because of this Western lens. And I'm not rejecting the Western lens. I'm just saying that when you include this cultural lens and the values and the piety and like just again in all caps without cutting them off, there's like a value there in retaining that family, right? I don't think we often talk about kind of the strength and resilience that it takes to sustain a relationship like that, right?
Right. It's a
I don't know if
complicated
you're
issue.
reacting
We
to that
can't.
as
Yeah,
well,
it's
but-
not just like bad or good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is a nice segue for our next submission, because you just brought up this dichotomy between Western and Eastern philosophies. And this submission was, you know, it's also related to Asian parental issues, but this is in terms of expectations. And this person wrote, "How the hell do you honor your Asian traditions, i.e. respect your elders and family before the individual, total and utter selflessness for your loved ones, and the sacrifices your Asian parents made for you, even though perpetuating the traditions in whole goes against your mixed Eastern-Western values? It's such a mindfuck to want to live the life of an American but still live up to your family's expectations. One thing my dad has always said to my brother and me, we're both first-gen Viet Americans, is that in terms of assimilation and professional success, he has his brothers beat. However, in terms of having children who uphold our traditions, he's in last place. His nieces and nephews all live in the same home as their parents, and they live life fully as a unit. Wanting to uphold our traditions to this extreme never interested me until I lost my mom and understood where those values come from." What about, how do you navigate that, Youngmi?
Well, I mean, I just like Peter's, you know, what you just discussed. I because I know that we discussed this last time, like, I always try to keep myself in check and make sure that how I'm viewing my quote unquote family issues isn't through like a white lens, like mom doesn't hug me enough or whatever, right? Like why don't you apologize to me? I want to call my parents by their first name or whatever. And so I think what Peter touched on earlier was like, you know, there is this idea in the West that like you can't stay in an abusive relationship. You got to cut everyone off and respect yourself. And then in the East, there's like this like, no, the suffering is the beauty and my family is important and other people above myself, and they respect that. And like, to be honest with you, like both those ideologies have weight to them, and there's actually, maybe it's like bad to be so extreme with and be like, oh, we have to be like I'm gonna cut you off because you keep calling me fat, mom, or like, or I'm gonna suffer in silence while my parents beat me. Like, we don't have to go that extreme with them. Maybe there is like some sort of balance where we can learn from these two cultures. And but I think this question is like maybe the struggle that this person's more Americanized and her parents are like, so there's that clash, it's like they're on these two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I don't know if this person wants to sway in one direction more than the other. I think it is just an inherent challenge. I've personally found it really difficult to navigate like being a quote unquote good, dutiful son at home with my parents, but then also just be myself, which is kind of like loud and irreverent and like just wrong all the time, you know? And it is
wrong all the time. Wrong and loud, Brian Park.
So often.
But
that's why people like me, because I'm wrong.
But something that has helped me and sort of shifted, especially in recent years, is I found that I was always criticizing these East Asian value systems that were like imbued upon me by my parents through a white lens, and really criticizing it and getting upset at my parents all the time. Like, why don't you say you're proud of me? Well, you like my other, this is why I'm the way I am. My other friends who have white parents, like, do this, and you don't ever do this for me. I was like really critical and like leveraging the white Germanic like the ideas of like how to lead a life and be an individual against and I've found that now I sort of do more like the pendulum has sort of shifted in the other direction for me. And I guess as a whole, I've sort of viewed it as, now I just sort of see it as an advantage in a way, where I am afforded this other this privilege, and I have this privilege of learning this other value system, and it's not more right or more incorrect than the other. It just gives me like a bigger tool set to work with, because now that I'm more critical of certain like the way this white individualism, that like when it's viewed through this like East Asian lens, sometimes I'm like, dude, you do need to respect your elders. Like you do need to like be more like that's to the individual. Every person is different. But realizing that has helped me like navigate this in between space. So rather than seeing as like
I know
I'm
exactly
completely
what you
lost, now it's I just have like an extra set of tools to like help reaffirm how I want to like exist in this world. I'm about to just say something really problematic really quick, and this is a joke, but sometimes I meet white people and I'm like, I wish your parents did beat you. You know what? Just joking. I think yeah, for sure. You can tell. you
Maybe
tell.
you deserve a srepa to the head.
You did not get hit, and maybe it would have.
I'll do it now.
You can tell the people who weren't chased out of their house with a wooden spoon.
No. You can tell.
You can tell.
It's a different. That's a different life, right?
What do you think about this?
Do you want to lead? We can alternate.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is I think a really common challenge for Asian Americans, with this kind of like bicultural identity and trying to figure out like how you are both Asian and American. And I think that like that both and of it is really important. It's just not either or. Either you're like just Asian or you're just American. Like you're both. And so there may be like parts of your different cultures that you hold on to and that you appreciate, and it doesn't have to be just one or the other.
Right.
And so like trying to figure that out, and like, I don't know, like that can be uncomfortable sometimes, of like figuring out like what parts, fit for you, like what your values are, what your expectations are. And maybe there can be some, I don't know, like maybe that causes some conflict in your family, or maybe there's some like discord or some, expectations that you're not meeting. And so like trying to, figure out how do you, find some kind of resolution with that and accept that, and hopefully get to a place where you feel like you can, I don't know, just kind of appreciate both parts of you, and or like all parts of you. And I think too, like we're always evolving and changing as individuals. So you might have an experience like this person was talking about, you know, losing their mom, and maybe that caused a shift in them. And I think at any point in our lives, you can kind of reevaluate where you are and what's important to you, and maybe, you know, bring in different aspects of your culture based on you know, what has changed in your perspective. And I think like everybody is entitled to that, and that's okay.
Yeah, I always hear like people getting older and then being like, my parents were right, I should have become a doctor. Brian.
Oh,
Like Brian.
I say that all the time.
why did I think that I would be a good idea to do what I don't know. Yeah. I hear people say it, a lot of that, like when they get married and have kids or something, then they start to be like, oh, now I understand my Asian parents.
They're like, wow, a wooden spoon does get them in line real fast.
Get them to shut the F up. I'm just kidding. I'm not condoning that at all. Peter, what are your thoughts?
A lot of these challenges are unique to being Asian American, but I think this is one area I would like to normalize a little bit, that we don't sign some contract at 18 to then ascribe to and adopt all the values of the family from that day forward. Like, it is an organic process. And you may not understand, as you were talking about, some of the reasons they did what they did, or why they emphasized what they did, until you reach a certain point in your life.
Right.
And as you said, I really liked what Melissa said about, you know, what did you say? You're entitled to change your position on these. That's what I'd want to say to this person, where it's clear there's a shift, like you said. You know, they've lost, I don't know if it was recent, but they lost their mom, and it's kind of changed how they've considered that part of their biculturalism and these particular values. And, you know, I would want him or her to know that, like, you're entitled to that change and to revisit these things at any time. And so, you know, maybe I think sometimes it's useful, and maybe I'd want to ask him or her, let me say the first thing. Sometimes it's, I think, useful to try to step out of what you already know about your parents' expression of these values. So the values they verbalize, and then how they're expressed within their actions and choices. But do you know what it means to you to honor your Asian traditions? You know, we're so often referencing what's right or wrong and whatnot off of what we know about what they state and how they make choices and express those values. But do you know that for yourself? Like, what you know, what does it mean to you to honor those? Which areas feel most emphasized to you? Which areas feel incongruent? What's it look like? Do you understand subtly the ways you live out kind of these values? Like, I think we need to understand those things, because inevitably, when we're dealing with a bicultural Asian American, or even biracial, right? Bicultural child, and coming from a family who came over here at a certain point, immigrated, and they're they're more monocultural versus bicultural, that there will be impasses, right? Inevitably, there will be impasses. And if you've cultivated some sense of personal security, that you have a sense of security that you know, that you privately honor those values and the influence of those values within your life, even if they won't see that. I think there's, I don't know, a little more, I think you can achieve, I might be high-minded here, but you can achieve a little more of a sense of peace around those points of tension when they arise.
That's so
great
practice.
So
because I'm realizing that I model a lot of my, like, definition of what it means to be a good, quote-unquote, Asian son is all through my parents' framework. And I don't think I've taken the time to really
what aspect of your culture do you feel like is important and that you should keep hanging on to?
Becoming a doctor.
Yeah.
Those are 1 through 5.
I like 1 through 5. That's it. I like both of your answers. I like Melissa's. Yeah, what Peter reiterated, just feeling entitled to going throughout your life and feeling close to different parts of either your Americanness or Asianness. And I also like that. Yeah, personally, think of what parts of your culture you want to hold on
and
to.
Even though I feel like I have a good sense of what I value as an individual, hearing both you and like Peter and Melissa, hearing you like reiterate it and reframe it, now I'm starting to question that. I think a lot of it is still
through your
based off
parents.
my parents.
I feel like that with you, Brian, too. Just because I feel like it's very important, but not in a bad way.
Right.
I think it's very important for Brian to be a good son.
As an individual, it means
I'm with you.
To be a good Asian is to be a good son and listen to my parents.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Surprise, Brian. This is an intervention. We're all just actually here because I actually hired Melissa. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Do you want to skip to this question first?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay, well,
touching on the multiracial,
I think this is a
multicultural thing
great
that Peter
segue to our
said.
next question, and this is a theme that we saw a lot from our submissions, and it is not feeling Asian enough. And this person wrote, I'm biracial. My mother is Chinese. I feel extremely disconnected from my Chinese heritage because my mom is extremely whitewashed. We're talking fundamental Baptist living in the South of her own free will with no Asian friends. She put that in parentheses. And she purposely didn't pass on language or cultural customs. In addition, I pass as white, so I feel like a fraud trying to be more involved in Asian spaces, despite also feeling like an outsider / uncomfortable in all white spaces. In parentheses, a number of times white people have said racist things to me thinking I was one of them. Woo-wee. Any advice for embracing more of my Asian heritage with so little knowledge and dealing with racial imposter syndrome?
I have to say, we did get a lot of messages from biracial people, a few biracial people, and then just a few like Asian Americans or Asians that grew up outside of Asia with this topic. So I made sure to include it. Yeah. There's a lot of people that are struggling with this identity thing. I remember we also got a message from somebody that received a scholarship for being a BIPOC, and they were biracial. They're half white, and they were struggling with feeling like they deserve that and taking it away from somebody. And even though I'm biracial, I think I really feel like a lot of people that are not even biracial, just Asian living outside of Asia, feel this way. This I don't speak the language, I don't know the cultures. If I go back there, whatever, a lot of their parents, like this person's parent, purposely withheld their culture from them. I don't have any advice, but I want to say something very interesting about something that I heard, I think I read it somewhere, where a lot of Asian parents purposely didn't teach their language to their immigrants, to their children, because that was a subconscious effort to protect them from emotional trauma. So these Korean whatever people probably had traumatic lives in Korea, and then when they came to America, they wanted to shield their child from whatever trauma they left behind. And part of that was withholding their language, which when I read that, I thought that was really interesting. And I think I was kind of doing that with Mino, because Mino doesn't speak Korean. Maybe there's a part of me that I'm trying to protect him from actually understanding what Koreans are saying, because that was so traumatizing for me as a child. So I don't have any advice, but I think that was interesting concept. How about you, Brian? What do you think about feeling your Korean?
Can I piggyback off that, or I'll hold the thought, and we can. I want to piggyback off that.
Oh, okay.
We gotta hear
please.
We gotta hear what Brian.
Piggyback off that right now. Yeah, please.
Right now.
Help us.
My dissertation was on biracial psychological well-being, and as part of that kind of literature review, I learned about research on bilingualism as well. And so to add to what you're saying about this distancing from the culture and the experience, because language is such a deeply rooted part of how we feel things, right? And so how through trauma parents may not have brought the language with them, if you will, to their kids. also, the research on bilingualism didn't become more firmly established until the like 80s, early 90s. And so there was just a lot of assumptions about what would happen. And if you look at biracialism or multiracialism in general, if you look at the history of that, there's a negative connotation in our country anyway.
Yep.
So it's the idea that if you're mixed, if you're split, all it does is causes problems, right? And so there is a sense of that within bilingualism as well. The kids are going to get confused. They're all going to be developmentally delayed. They're not so. Everyone was sort of operating, or a lot of people were operating from that assumption as well. And so that also, so the culture, if you will, kind of pushed towards only teaching one language as well.
Right. That's like so interesting. Because I kind of remember that. Like, I feel like reading stuff like back in the old days, like they said if your kids were bilingual, they'd be stupid. Look at me now.
Showed them.
Sorry. Yeah, Brian, what do you feel like? How do you what's your relationship with this, like, not feeling Asian enough as like an Asian person that grew up outside of Asia?
You know, I can't say that even for perhaps the wrong reasons, I've always felt very Asian because my parents, like, preserved old school, like, strict Korean, like a very strict Korean value system in my home, even though I grew up in a place that had 0 Asians.
Yeah.
And that outsider, like, that feeling of being an outsider almost reaffirmed my Asianness in, like, a weird, kooky way, because I was always perceived as different or othered. And you know, this is hard because it sounds like this person in particular doesn't have the immediate resources to, like, meet other Asian people, and one thing I've learned just by doing this podcast is, for one, I'm not, like, there are the Asian American diaspora is just so far reaching that it has like so many different shapes and textures to it. And all of the experiences and all of the stories, and it's all valid. And I'm very lucky to live in a place like New York where I can engage and meet with other Asian Americans, where I'm surprised, even if it's for people who like grew up in a completely disparate place from me, there's like a lot of commonalities through all of our experiences. But yeah, I don't, like, in terms of like, this is just like a personal anecdotal thing, you know, like, for me, it's just the way I've sort of embraced my Asianness is just by consuming lots of different types of content, and, like, even if it's online, and just talking to other Asian people and realizing that it doesn't look a certain specific way. Like, even in the last episode, we had Ed, who is a Korean adoptee. That is a swath of the Asian American population that I just was not privy to whatsoever. But again, I feel very lucky to have heard those stories. I've learned from them and realized, like, I just know that is also part of this. It's part of the experience. It's not a monolith. It doesn't look a certain way.
Yeah, but what do you think about, I mean, maybe this is like too long of a thing, but, like, what do you think about, because I know a lot of people struggle with not feeling Asian enough.
Yeah.
But you're just like, I've never felt not Asian enough. I have no idea.
No, there are.
I just eat my spaghetti in the morning.
Well, that's what I mean, though. I've learned that there are moments now where I feel like I don't feel Asian enough. Like, I'm a fraud, maybe, because I felt like I was super Asian, but then I meet other Asians who speak the language better than me, or, like, uphold certain traditions more than me. But again, like, I'm like, honestly, I feel like I am sort of indirectly answering a question in that, no, my existence is valid. I am Asian enough. It doesn't look a certain way. I need to squash that thought in my head.
Nice. That's good advice.
but again, it's a privilege that I have. Like,
Yeah.
this podcast is a tremendous privilege to meet so many different types of Asian American voices. I live in a place like New York where people have so many different types of upbringings. So for someone who I'm assuming is in
a
could perhaps
non-Asian
be
place.
in a more isolated position, I don't know if I am qualified to give prescriptive advice in this situation.
I mean either, but I will say one thing: if anyone ever fucks with you and says you're not Asian enough, I will bring the beat down. I will be on your side and I'll kick their fucking asses. I hate especially those Asian fucking gatekeepers that harass biracial people and fucking adoptees like some fucking kook just because you fucking were born in wherever and then you moved here when you were 2 years old, so fuck you. Like, whoever's fucking gatekeeping, I will fucking lay the beat down on you. That's my advice.
That's your advice.
Yeah, how dare you? Anyway, sorry, that was me being physical violence, and Brian we don't know what we're talking about. What would you say about this? What would you say about this feeling, like not feeling Asian enough?
First off, I'm right in there with that, like, ride or die, people better not fuck with you with that. The gatekeeping is such a major hurdle to get through in your own personal journey. This is a very activating sort of question, and from this person, I think Youngmi and I are both half Korean, and so the fact that y'all were able to include a question as well from a biracial Asian person is pretty meaningful. And I actually think a lot of what Brian was saying about the validity of Brian's like, the validity of
Against
your
all
experience.
A story of resiliency.
Like,
Brian said something correct.
I'm really he's not wrong all the time. I'm really passionate about trying to help biracial Asians experience themselves, and it sounds so woo maybe, but sort of in a more beautiful way. It's almost romanticized, but this is on our website near the bottom, but it's also something I talk a lot about, which is just that you have your own place in this story. It's like there's millions of drops in this river, and this flow through time of like the Asian diaspora. And there's all these individual drops that make this river that flows forward, and you are a part of that. Like you are not outside of that, and you deserve to explore and carve out what you bring to this identity. Similarly to how we may work with women who identify in some atypical, maybe with what would be considered maybe less heteronormative ways or less gendered ways, and they may struggle with their idea of womanness, right? It's this idea that you are a representation of womanness within what you bring and within how you identify and your choice, and that's true in this context as well, that like you whether or not other people, gatekeepers, or whoever we're talking about, whether or not they always see it, you represent the diaspora as much as anyone else in that river. And so, I like to encourage people. I think resources is a good step here. Like, if there is that motivation to personally invest and have support, then it can be an exciting journey. It can activate insecurity, of course, because we're dealing with that sense of belonging and that sense of whether or not we're an imposter. But it can be an exciting journey to, provide resources that are more kind of Asian-centric or focused within particular parts of that experience. It can also be really helpful, I think, to provide resources around being biracial. and the unique challenges that come with that. One of the issues that biracial people have, even outside of a context where mama lives in the South, has no Asian friends, and watches the Dukes of Hazzard every day or something. The Dukes of Hazzard comment threw me off. What was I saying? What was I saying right there? What was I lost my thread there? What was I saying?
Dukes of Hazzard's really
threw
you for a loop.
Was anyone listening to me?
Even if mom lives in the South and doesn't have any Asian friends.
Before that.
Like resources, like biracial resources.
Sorry, I was talking about the biracial resources, and then I lost my thread.
Even if your mom is Asian-y, I'm trying to just guess what you're about to say.
Oh, shoot. No, I'm sorry, I lost it.
Oh, it's okay.
But
I just want to point out that was I just want to touch on the first thing you said, though. I think that was it was such an eloquent way that you put that. The truth of the matter is you are fucking Asian. Like what? What? You are a drop in the river of Asians, or whatever Peter said. He said it way better. Right? Like there's no way some horrible man online is gonna make you, as a biracial person, all of a sudden overnight just a white person. You are not a white person. I'm sorry.
And
I remember what I was gonna say now.
Well, okay, good. See, I knew it.
Get it.
So
dropping
as a particularly for biracial individuals or biracial Asians, is you come most likely from parents who identify as monoracial. And so one of the challenges we face as biracial children is that in most cases, at least to date, this may slowly be changing, our parents they haven't been equipped to help us navigate this blended identity.
That's
they don't know what it's
such
like to be
a good
biracial.
point. That is such a good point.
They don't know what it's like to be biracial.
I just want to point out, when Youngmi kept grilling me for a better response, that was the challenge. I don't know what it's like to be biracial, Youngmi.
No, I'm saying because a lot of Asian Americans that are not biracial feel not Asian enough.
Yeah, I know.
Because I've saw that too in our messages. Just straight up pure Asians.
Pure.
Pure is a weird way to say that. Not us dirty Asians. Yeah.
That's right. One of the internalizations that we have to kind of break out of, right, is that this framework of authenticity. Right?
Yeah.
And what is authentic and what isn't. Having some understanding through therapy or whatever, what you've internalized about what's authentic and what isn't is an important step. And again, there's sort of a theme of liberation here, right? If you can kind of break the chains, like these are oppressive frames of mind, right?
Right.
If you can kind of understand that and kind of break those, then there's a more liberated place in which you can embrace your part of that river, essentially.
Yeah.
Damn.
And maybe
so go out there.
Yeah.
Drop that Dukes of Hazzard reference, even though it's 30 years outdated.
No,
I'm 36. I barely know what that is. I think I heard it once. I don't know.
I was like, oh, you are showing your age.
So good.
Yeah, I guess it's like just break down those barriers, man. We're all just like, we're living on these cages in our brain, man. Oh, Melissa, did you want to add anything to that? Sorry, I started getting wacky. Did you want to add anything to the last question?
I mean, I'll say, like to echo like what other folks have said. You know, you get to define what your identity is, and you can. Like nobody else can tell you like whether or not you're Asian enough or like what kind of Asian you should be. Like you can figure that out for yourself.
Yeah.
No one
and I can also relate to, you know, even though I'm monoracial Asian, but I'm half Filipino and I'm
you're
half
biracial.
Chinese.
Yeah.
And there have definitely been times where I felt not Asian enough, not Filipino enough, not Chinese enough,
Yeah.
and like not American enough, and that's something that I struggled with for a lot of my life, especially growing up. I grew up in Ohio, where I was like one of, or like just a handful of Asian kids,
Right.
And so trying to figure out, like, well, what does it mean to me to be from these different cultures and to have this kind of Filipino, Chinese, American identity, and just like that's something that I can define for myself. Like nobody, can tell me like I'm not Asian enough. Well, I mean they can, but fuck them. I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a human being that's not enough. But I feel like that's like the thing that people make you feel a lot. Were you gonna say something, Peter?
Yeah, one more thing to add for this listener. This is from my own personal experience. I can't speak to your own journey, young me, but having or stumbling upon or being fortunate enough to have even one relationship, but relationships with Asian Americans who may accept you as Asian more than you even accept yourself as Asian.
Yeah.
Can be like really important. That was really important in my own journey. Is hanging out with some Koreans and all the activation, the insecurity, or hanging out, joining like the Asian American graduate students group, and like they're just open acceptance. Like, yeah,
They don't even
us.
question it.
I mean, yeah, you're Asian, and so like for
Yeah.
this listener, like have that like, and that's how I think the four of us feel in
Yeah.
regard to this listener. Like I think we probably feel like she's more Asian. I'm not sure. It's a man
This
or woman.
person's name.
I
I
think
don't
we-
think we included it. Yeah.
I
this
think
person.
we
Yeah,
feel
include
like
his name.
I think it's at a point right now where we feel like they're more Asian than they feel.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like having those relationships with people that accept you like that, even if you're not there. And I just really think it can be
Yeah.
a helpful thing.
I also want to say it's really funny. Like my ex-husband is adopted, and it was really funny when we first went to Korea, and Koreans were just like, "Oh, you're adopted? I don't give a shit. Like you're Korean. Come here. Like take your shoes off." And just like them being like treating him just like a regular Korean. And I think that felt really nice for him. And then it's like not to keep bringing up the gatekeepers, but like if somebody's doing that to you, whoever's saying that person's insecure. The fucking Koreans in fucking Korea in the rice paddy out somewhere, they're not gonna say shit about. They don't give a fuck. You know what I mean?
Right.
Anyway, we're running out of time, so we wanted to. What?
Do you want to just skip it?
Yeah, I think we're just gonna skip the last question, and then should we ask our.
Yeah. So, Peter and Melissa, wow. Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
So sorry.
The listeners, we want this to go forever, but this is just
That
an
was our
excuse to have
fault.
you back in a future episode so we can do this again. But first and foremost, thank you for lending your time and your expertise and us providing so many great insights to all of us tonight.
Yeah, and I want to thank our listeners for submitting all these questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We got so many, like we
Yeah.
always do. And I just want to thank
we can do
everyone
it
that
again
asked
at
these
some
questions
point.
for being so vulnerable.
And before we let you go, where can our listeners find you and your work?
So we finally have a website,
Woo.
and which we're really excited about. It's buckeyepsychology.com, and we're also and the website has all of our contact information, email addresses, phone numbers, and we're also on Psychology Today. We're still updating the website, but we'll have some information about our training and bios and the kinds of clients that we work with. But folks are always welcome to reach out and just say hi or ask for resources, or just about us.
Yeah, and Brian vetted it. Brian took a look, and Brian said, "Looks good."
It is a great website.
Looks good.
You-
Listeners,
Green light. Give you the
check it out.
Give you the green light. So, but yeah, I would invite listeners if some people are more comfortable asking something in private or kind of using that medium, and so if people do have questions that they didn't want to risk kind of maybe being on the show or something, then we're people can always reach out, and we're happy to
And we're so grateful, like you were saying, like that people were willing to be vulnerable and ask these questions and really like put themselves out there.
Yeah.
Like I think just anything that kind of normalizes, that Asians have mental health issues and that we can seek help too. And there are folks like, Tona and me out here who can, provide some support around that. Like, I think that just hopefully like decreases some of the stigma and makes people feel less alone.
Right. Well, it was so great to have you, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, wait, before we go, Brian, where can our listeners find you? Forgot.
You guys can find me on socials at It's Brian Park. And what about you, Young-Mi?
YM Mayor, TikTok, Young-Mi Mayor. Brian's TikTok is blowing up. Everyone get in at the ground level. It's Brian Park. Follow our podcast on Feeling Asian Podcast,
YouTube,
Instagram and
whatever.
TikTok, YouTube,
Yeah.
Patreon. And thank you very much.
Bye,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you, listeners.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.